loser, monkey, nigga, motherfucker, slut. Even if you didn't engage in hate speech yourself, you've probably read or heard these words before. Nowadays, hate speech is everywhere. How come hate speech is more prominent nowadays than it was before? And how can we respond to it when we hear or read it? Let's find out.
Hate speech is any form of expression that is addressed verbally but also written. So this can be, for example, in form of a letter, but this can also be in form of an email, but this can also be, for example, in form of a video or a picture or a meme. And especially the online aspect, as I said, brings a new dimension to this topic because there are so many ways we can address each other online, in an email, in a blog post, on social media, sharing emojis and sharing memes. So I think this already brings quite a different dimension to the topic. And obviously the intention of hate speech is to directly harass, threaten someone, or even be more aggressive and try to accuse someone in regards to violence. And this can be addressed to an individual, but also to a group of people, which I think is also important to take into consideration. And then on top of it, we also define hate speech when especially the protected characteristics are addressed. So when I directly or indirectly address issues in relation to gender or religion, belief, sexuality, or disabilities with really the direct intent to hurt someone, be it verbally or be it in written. And here again, I can do this as an individual, but I can also do this as a group of people. So I think this is a very rough definition, a complex definition of a very complex topic, of course. But obviously we need to be careful, and I think another aspect of online hate speech is also that when we communicate online, the whole body language or face impression is missing. So I think this is also something to keep in mind when we talk about online and offline hate speech, that online hate speech is probably a bit more difficult also to identify, because also another important aspect is culture to this topic, because we also need to understand that just looking at Europe, which is quite a very diverse continent, which is super great, and we all come from different countries, we have different cultures, we speak different languages. So another important aspect is also to understand that, for example, a word or a saying in one country is maybe less offensive than in another country or in another culture. So I think culture also plays a very important aspect in this topic of hate speech.
Internet and social media play a crucial role when it comes to hate speech. Why is that? And is it that different from offline hate speech?
What makes online hate speech so much more difficult to track is that on the internet nowadays, every one of us can be a content creator, so we can all express our opinions freely, which I think it's great, but unfortunately it's sometimes misused by people. And then I can also post my opinion anonymously, which I think makes a lot of people more confident to, for example, spread hate if they don't have to reveal their personas. But then again, it is much more difficult to track and to counteract, and also the message is spread much more faster and to a more global audience than offline hate speech.
How can we identify hate speech? And why are people spreading hate speech?
So I think in a conversation, I think it's probably, I would say, a little bit easier to identify, because if I have a person in front of me and if the person is mentioning something, I can maybe immediately understand from the body language and the facial expression if this is meant seriously, or if this is maybe sarcastic, or if this is a joke. Obviously, this is rather difficult to identify online, especially if I receive a text message or some emojis. So I think what is important to maybe not jump into conclusions too soon if I receive something, because what we also very often try to mention to children and young people is often also to put yourselves in the shoes of the other person, because we often don't know the full picture behind why we receive this kind of message or this kind of content. Maybe the person is in a very bad place at the moment, had bad grades in school or problems at home or health issues. So I think this is also something, if I receive it at the very first stage, something to take into consideration, to try to put myself into the shoes of the other person, and then maybe as a recommendation, if it's like, if we're talking about the very beginning, is obviously to try to stay kind and maybe try to also reply with a bit of humor and to try to understand and make sure you also understand it in the way it was intended to be. Because as I said, sometimes if we receive a message, the other person was implying to make a joke or being sarcastic, but we understand it in a different way. So this is, I think, as a first step, I think something maybe to keep in mind as well.
Reacting on hate speech. Is it a good idea? And how can we do it?
I think that really depends on the person, and I think it also depends on what kind of hate speech it is. I think if it's the very first time and maybe it's also from someone you know offline, in the offline world, then possibly yes. I think if it's from a complete stranger and if it gets very offensive and direct, I think it's good to turn to someone for advice. And I think another important message is maybe also for the young people, even if I'm not directly a victim of hate speech, but I see someone struggling, or I know that someone is receiving hateful comments, it's also important to not be a bystander, but be an upstander, to try to support the other person, because I think it's very important to talk about it. So I think that really depends on the person if you should reply or not reply directly.
Have you already been confronted with hate speech? Think about what you did back then. Would you react differently after hearing those tips?